Welcome everyone joining us today. This is our official kickoff of our Learn United series for 2022. We found these to be helpful and well attended in last year, 2021, and we look forward to seeing all of you join us again this year. Our next session is in about a week and a half, on March 22nd, and our topic will be rewriting a zoning code for a modern city, understanding the impact on affordable housing and neighborhoods. I'm Amy Grubbs, and I've been a part of our United Way team since 2012. I primarily work with our local partners on fundraising, and kind of the best part of my job is getting to know so many of you and the different companies that you come from, the employees kind of all across our community. I've been enjoying the benefits of watching your multi-generational workplace for years and seeing how philanthropy and employee engagement all holds hands together with that. But today we have a diverse panel to discuss the benefits of what that looks like, a multi-generational workplace, which we're experiencing a little bit of a unique way currently. I was flattered to be asked to join this group today to moderate this panel because as we were kind of talking earlier, I'm technically a millennial by birth, but when you look at my behaviors, they follow a little bit more of a Generation X path. But my coworkers and friends would tell you that day in and day out, I'm a true baby boomer at heart. And I know many of our panelists feel the same way today and at times. In fact, I really want to make that point before we get started in our discussion today. We want to start off by clarifying that not every person born in a certain generation will identify with the broad characteristics, generally that define any generation. But that said, for the first time in our history, our employers have up to 5 different generations interacting in the same workplace right now. And this dynamic really offers a broad skill set and a broad experience base. But it also gives us a little bit of challenges in terms of breaking down some natural barriers and really getting to know each other. And that's what we're kind of here to talk about today. So I'm happy to introduce our guests and panelists today. First of all, we have Barbara Benham. She is the Executive Vice President and Chief Public Affairs Officer at Huntington Bank and the United Way of Central Ohio current Board of Directors Chairperson. Welcome, Barbara. Next, we have Malcolm Jackson. He is a specialist executive at Deloitte Consulting. Thanks so much for joining us, Malcolm.
Hi, everyone.
Jordan Gomes, Director of Development at The Ohio State University. And lastly, but not least, our former United Way of Central Ohio colleague and teammate, Solo Karula, Chief Philanthropy Officer at Godman Guild. Thanks all for joining us.
Of course. Thank you, Amy.
So let's get started. Let's introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit more about your daily role at your current organization and your background that led you there. Solo, let's get started with you.
Okay. First of all, thank you for that introduction. I felt that a plug was definitely going to be made about us being coworkers, and I'm excited to dive into that a little more in this conversation. Learn a lot of things working with you, Amy, so I'm excited to talk about those in this context. With that, since my time at United Way, I am now with the Godman Guild Association, which is a local nonprofit organization focused on enhancing the social and economic mobility of individuals and families in Central Ohio. Really awesome organization working in youth family programming, education programming, as well as workforce development programs. Really love it here. Sad to not be working with you, Amy, but enjoying working with the community and our needs more. Again, work in fundraising for the past 6-ish years now, but that definitely wasn't the start to my career. If we go way back in time, I used to work at my parents' business back when I was, like 10, 11. So definitely not the official start to my career, but really being hands-on and working at that point, while at the same time not really understanding the dynamics that go behind, working with different people and different generations. Um, since school and being in Columbus, I actually started working part-time at the Columbus Chamber of Commerce as a development associate at that point. And then kind of grew from there, moved to United Way. So my trajectory here and working with people has really been um, from a younger age and really working with the community. I've always had a hand either in the business side or nonprofit space in this community. So it's been interesting to navigate that while being on the younger side or earlier side of my career and working with all these different um, individuals that have amazing names, reputations, and different skill sets throughout the community that span all 4 other generations. So first job, easy, doing the most, and now working towards safeguarding programs in our community and engaging with all these different people. So that's, I think, it.
Thanks, Solo.
Sure.
Malcolm, how about you? Tell us more about what you do at Deloitte day in, day out, and what kind of got you there.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's so my title isn't really representative of kind of what I do. I think for those who aren't familiar with Deloitte, it's formed its base as a audit firm, so auditing large firms. But a number of years ago, they branched off into other areas. So they branched into consulting, technology consulting, and just human capital consulting. In my day-to-day role, I focus primarily in the federal government space, so consulting with the back to the federal government. And I engage with executives in the federal space, so chief information officers, human capital officers, financial expert or officials in the federal government. And my background has been primarily in 3 particular areas, mostly in technology. I did a stint in engineering, and then I also did a brief part of my career in marketing. But what brought me here is just a SWAT of a variety of different roles across my career that spanned primarily in the federal space. Primarily in the commercial space. But about 10 years ago, I did a stint in the federal government. So I served in the federal government as the chief information officer for the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. So thinking of what was going on during that time, I led all of technology for EPA during the BP oil spill, as well as during the Japan tsunami. So I had systems tracking radiation levels in this country during that time, which that gave me an entry into the federal government. In fact, I served in a president's administration. So I served in President Obama's administration. And it just gave me an entry level into the federal government at such a high level that it enabled me to be in the position that I'm in today, where I consult back to the federal government in a variety of different roles. In fact, today I'm in Huntsville, Alabama, and meeting with NASA. And NASA's mission now is to go to the moon again by 2027. So having conversations with them around that. In that space, you can see I have the Women's Day behind me. It's Women's Month. What NASA will be doing is going back to the moon for the first time since the 70s, and they'll be taking the next man back to the moon and the first woman to the moon. So it takes my role is kind of very broad. It gets into a variety of different things in technology. And I have to tell you, as I think about when I entered into the workforce, I won't say when, but let's just say it was a few years ago. I think about what the world was like at that time. And it was a world where there was no PCs in the workforce. There was no network, no commercial internet. There were no cell phones. We actually had to call people to communicate with them or either get into a meeting with them. So there was none of that texting stuff going on. And I even remember when I started working, MTV wasn't out. I remember when it launched. So to see where we've come as a society, to see where we've the journey that we've passed and gone through, it's just amazing. And as I look at my engagement, because I work with a variety of different generations, I continue to learn. What I'm excited about this call today is I'm looking to learn something from other generations. I just, my advice to people would be to be open to change, to always be open to listening and learning from others. It's been one of the things that's helped me tremendously throughout my career. So that's kind of a brief background about me. I'm here to learn about others. So I'll pass the baton to others and just excited to learn from others today. So thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. There's so much to dive into as it pertains to some of your experiences. How unique, and thank you so much for taking time to join us today for this conversation. Jordan, tell us a little bit about your journey at the College of Law and how you landed at the Ohio State University.
Of course. Thank you so much, Amy. And honestly, a delight to be around such stellar professionals. I got to say, just hearing Malcolm talk about NASA has me jazzed. So like Amy said, right now I dedicate my time and energy toward really forming and building relationships with alumni and donors to the Moritz College of Law over at Ohio State. And truthfully, I mean, similar to Solo, I did not see, university advancement or fundraising or maybe even philanthropy in my path professionally or personally. As coming from a single parent household, first gen college student, really navigated a space where I did not know what I wanted to do with my career or where I saw myself. So I was actually born and raised in Massachusetts and ended up doing state school over there to kind of stay close to family, stay close to friends. But through that experience, I think I knew I wanted to challenge myself by, maybe leaving New England, doing something that nobody in my family, nobody in my community had necessarily done. So for me to move out here almost 6 years ago to the day, it's been a rewarding journey, but it's also opened my eyes to so many different perspectives. And naturally, I've met a bunch of amazing people on the way. So when I got to OSU about 6 years ago, really the intent was to go to graduate school, get my degree in education, and then support students, point blank. I wanted to be the person, that had essentially, like folks had helped my college journey as a first-gen student. I wanted to support and assist students through their journey. So when I first started at OSU, I was not in fundraising. I was in student life. I used to manage residence halls on campus. I was a live-in staff member. So, I also saw that perspective from, being a millennial. I was with the new generation. I've seen multiple generations now come through the residence halls, these students, the experiences that they bring. But to Malcolm's point, it really allowed me to learn from them. I mean, there were opportunities where I grew alongside them, and sure, I am I'm the adult in the building. I'm, a 26, 27-year-old professional. But at the end of the day, I feel like I gained so much from that experience as well. So when I knew it was time to, pivot out of student life, I really looked at the advancement space as an opportunity to continue, indirectly supporting the student experience, indirectly making sure that students are able to continue their journey at the university. So I've been very, very fortunate that my path has led me over to the College of Law. And I mean, similar to folks in this space, the people I meet with, they could range from elected officials to executives to partners at law firms. But I have so much to learn from them, not even generationally, but just as human beings. So yeah, to be in this space with you all and to, to see how far we've come from our individual journeys is really exciting. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Jordan. That near peer experience is really helpful, right? As we're young adults trying to figure it all out and trying to celebrate our successes and figure out if we're failing or not. So provided that for a lot of students there. Barbara, you've got one of the most prominent roles at Huntington Bank, and we've gotten to know you in a couple of different ways over the years. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your role really is day in and day out at Huntington and how you got there?
I'm so glad to be with all of you, and I think I've made 5 new friends. I already knew Amy well, so I hope we'll get to continue this conversation. I'm Barbara Benham, and I worked for Huntington. I've been proud to be there for 25 years, and I actually kind of grew up at Huntington. I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer, but I started 25 years ago as an administrative assistant at the bank. And I took that role. Prior to that, I'd had about 7 years in nonprofit development experience. So similar to what Jordan and Solis are doing. So those fundraising skills are very, very handy. Particularly in all of our collective support for United Way, right? And raising funds for our mission at United Way. And I worked cross-sectionally on political campaigns and in the nonprofit world. And I was actually as a development director for a local nonprofit pitching Huntington for a grant. And I didn't get the grant, but I did get a job and said, would you like to come here and help look out for nonprofits and be part of our community engagement group? And so I am now in the job of the person who it was Dorothy Brownlee's her name, who did so much for our community over the course of her life. She hired me and I now have her role. So 25 years later. So it's kind of a nice story just to think about. I was at Huntington in my late 20s and I'm now cresting into my 50s here. So I've seen as the bank has grown, the bank was 29 billion in assets when I started and now it's close to 200. We're still on that same corner of Broad and High, 156 years, still looking out for communities and people. And that's really my job. I work day to day as I co-lead our environmental, social, and governance efforts. We get some support from Deloitte there on that, Malcolm. And our corporate responsibility, working with all of our stakeholders, so our communities, our customers, our shareholders, and our colleagues, of course. And then I also head up our public affairs, which is our government relations group. So elected officials at the federal, state, and local level. And what we're trying to do is build partnerships together so that we can better serve our customers and communities. So that's sort of the day-to-day work, and it's very gratifying because it's all pointing in the same direction of the same purpose of how do we help people, how do communities thrive? How do we make sure that that's an inclusive process? And how do we help everyone to achieve the opportunity and potential that they have? If they don't have that, that we help enable that. So day to day, it's a real pleasure, and getting to partner with United Way and seeing the work that United Way and Amy, you do with all of our companies that you engender, has allowed me in all of those career opportunities to be with multiple generations. And I would reflect back on something Malcolm said. I remember the first communication tool that came into my first job was we got a fax machine. And that was high speed communication on a political campaign when you could start. And I remember you could fax, like you'd have to stay up almost all night, but you could fax like a fax every 3 minutes or something. So if you had 200 people to fax, and that was considered lightning speed communication. So I think that's probably a theme today we may pick up on, is how just the communication pace and change. And, I still write letters, but, certainly that was more of what we fell back on in the past. And does anyone ever seen a fax machine anymore? They used to roll.
Oh, not that. I have not seen
I'm
that.
not
I've
familiar with
definitely
that
seen a fax machine.
I've seen one. I've used one.
Lots and lots of things have changed, that's for sure. And, one of the things that we want to talk a little bit about is kind of, what you might call an icebreaker, really going back and learning a little bit about like, what was your first job? Not where you are now and, maybe the most professional of settings, but every one of us started somewhere. What did that look like for you? Who washed cars? I did 9 summers at the Firestone Park Dairy Freeze. I can throw you an ice cream cone, no problem. But Jordan, what did that look like for you? When did you start working and what was that role?
Yeah, so I will say it was not as tasty as ice cream scooping. That would have been much more pleasant. But my first job admittedly came, when I was 18. Going right into college, I'll be very transparent. I was not the most motivated in high school. So obtaining a job at 16 or 17 just was not in the cards. So at 18, I was like, well, it's time to buck up. It's time to, get some employment, get some cash. So for me, I started as an office assistant in a residence hall on campus. And really that was byproduct of work study, financial aid package at the university. But in addition to that, I also served as a day camp counselor during the summers. So once again, that was working with, I had a group of, I want to say 10 to 12 kids that were literally in 8 to 10 age range. So it was, as you can imagine, a lot to handle during the summer, like the warm summer days in Massachusetts. But it was really, really fulfilling. And I think both of those experiences, right, kind of contrasted each other, where one, I'm outside pretty regularly. I'm basically, herding these children around, entertaining them, having fun, providing an awesome experience. And then on the other end, I had my first experience in an office setting where, I'm sitting at a desk, I'm serving as point for folks. I'm really a resource in the building. But I really got to learn what does it look like to even have a relationship with a manager on a very one-on-one basis. And then what is it like to develop relationships with my colleagues and my peers? who, also ranged in age from freshman to senior. Whereas at the day camp, it would range even more dramatically, where we have children, but we also have, an executive director of the camp. We have the camp director. So I think it's been very fascinating, especially thinking back to almost over 10 years ago, that experience. Yeah, it was just very different. And I've seen, I think our workplaces begin to evolve, where it used to be very top down. And, there would always be, I think that, at least in my head, wanting to yield to authority, viewing leaders as someone that needs to be more seasoned and older. But now I think we're going into, a space where there's a more open source environment when it comes to the workplace and it comes to problem solving and communicating. So it's been a journey. And I will say, I do miss being a day camp counselor sometimes, because as you can imagine, I was sun-kissed all the time and I just had a lot of fun. We would play archery and, do a bunch of different sports. So it's been a journey.
Well, that's great. I mean, I hope all of us and whatever that first employment role was, were able to have fun. That's for sure. Bro, what about
Absolutely.
you? What got you started? What was that first paycheck?
Is that directed to me? Amy?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I wasn't sure if I caught my name there or not. Really quickly, I'm gonna do a shameless plug here. The Guild owns and operates Camp Mary Orden, and we are currently hiring for summer counselors. So shameless plug, look at our website if anybody on this call would be interested in that or know somebody that would. Really awesome camp, and I love camp. So I love that, Jordan, that you worked in camps all the summers. But I think I kind of stated this earlier in my start. Both my parents were small business owners growing up, so I used to really help around on both of their businesses growing up, pretty much, I'm not going to say daily, but on the regular. Oh, sorry about that. We have our participants in our building today. I'm happy to see, honestly, people back in person, slowly. That was my start. But in terms of more of a professional start, I would definitely have to talk about my time at the European Youth Parliament. So it's the largest youth NGO back in Europe, and I was a part of that for 6 years. So I started working for them on a volunteer basis that turned into more of an official role as I stepped up, and I did development for them, as well as a lot of communication and advisory type consulting work in terms of expansion and what's the word I'm looking for? Connection to the community, as well as impact. So I learned a lot working with a lot of business leaders at that point, and I was around 16 was when that happened. So I was really fortunate to be able to sit at tables with like national banks back in Cyprus, where I grew up, and create partnerships with them that are still going on 10 years later now in funding that organization. So I had a pretty good start in fundraising, even though I didn't realize it at that point. But through that, now sitting in this position with the Guild specifically, that's really helped me in being able to communicate and understand the needs both of the community and partners, from people that are close to my age, and then people that are in generations that are way ahead. Since I had to really navigate that space at an age where I didn't really know what was even happening around me. I was just going through the motions of just, I'm doing work. So it was a very interesting experience. And I think the one takeaway from that was that I realized that even going back to your point, Amy, at the beginning, even people that are born around the same time or same generation might be products of a different time, just because of their background and everything else that happens in their lives that can affect kind of who they are. So I really did learn that from that first experience, and I'm really humbled by it, because it's helping me a lot now to navigate the world.
Barbara, I can only assume that you were in customer service of some sort as you got started. What was your project?
In a way, that's accurate, actually. My first job still remains my favorite all-time job. And I would go back and do it tomorrow. I loved it so much. I worked at McDonald's, and I actually applied before I turned 16 so I could start on my 16th birthday. I was so excited to go to work, and I worked 4-hour shift, and I asked if I could work a second 4-hour shift, and they wouldn't let me because I was a minor. So, and I loved it because of the diversity of the people and getting to, I mean, I did everything front of house, back of house, the different ages of people I worked with, as well as the customer and the clientele. And then I think food service teaches you so much, and just service in general. And then in college, I was a waitress, I waitressed both at Perkins, which was faster. And then I also worked at Morton's, which was fine dining. So I had sort of both continuums of clientele and speed of service. So at one restaurant, you would have one table all night, and in another, hopefully you'd have 20 over the course of your breakfast shift. And it taught me, it's interesting. I think one of the reasons I can fare well in politics is because of the skills I learned as a waitress, and reading people and thinking about what's important to them and how to serve. I call it the platinum rule, like what is important to others, not how I would want to be treated, but how they want to be treated, and adapting and to the struggles that come with basic service. So I loved that job. I was also an RA in college, Jordan. That was a great job too. That was a fun one.
Got some similarities on the panel. Well, Malcolm, take us home. We can't wait to hear.
I know, I'm dying to know what you did.
What I did, okay, so I'll do two. I'll talk about my first job, then I'll talk about my first professional job, if that works for everyone. And I'll try and do it pretty quickly. My first job, I was not looking for it. My brother I have a brother who's a year and a half older than me. I grew up in Chicago, inner city, and my brother was working at a grocery store. And unbeknownst to me, he came home one day and said, "Hey, I got a job for you." I said, "What?" And he got me a job working with him at a grocery store in the inner city, bagging groceries. So that was my first job. I bagged groceries, I mopped floors, I swept floors, I worked with essentially customer service. And I can tell you I actually enjoyed the job quite a bit because there was a lot of customer service interaction. I got to learn about really working and what it meant to work, to be on time, to interact with other people. And he actually got me on the job earlier than, I think you had to be 16 to start working. I was 15. So I was kind of under the cupboard working. Don't tell anybody. Please don't tell anybody. But yeah, so I did that I held that job from 15 to 18 till I went off to college. So I had that job for almost 2.5 years. But I enjoyed it. We had a great time there, a good group of people I worked with. Transitioning to my first professional job, my first job was with Shell Oil Company in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was in the drilling engineering division. I designed offshore wells so I worked in the engineering department. We designed wells. So as you think about offshore, you see these rigs off in the Gulf of Mexico. I flew by helicopter out there. I spent time out there. I spent quite a bit of time. And what's really interesting, kind of Barbara, what you were talking about around communications, the way they use microwave systems to communicate, to make phone calls and all. And that's how we faxed information, was by microwave. And there was no, every day people would get up and type up the results of what happened on the rig that day. There was no computer system that did any of this. So you drilled down 1,000 feet, oil pressure was this, your mud was there. I mean, it was all these type of specifics, and you had to microwave that information on shore. And for people like me, I was reviewing that information, and then at critical times, I would go out to the rigs to help them work through that. Now, what happened is they decided PCs came into the workforce. So they decided that they were going to build separate PC systems that would go out on the rigs, and they'd use those for communicating it, and they were going to microwave that. I got involved in that. And what's really interesting, that's kind of what got me into the world of technology, because I kind of came in through a back door. I was never trained in it. And I learned so much about technology, I became kind of like the business expert. And at that time, no one knew anything about PCs. So I was learning in the job, on the roll, and I kind of became a PC expert. That kind of branched me into technology, where I made a transfer out of engineering and moved into technology. But what's really interesting is today, as I said, I'm down here with NASA, and we're talking about low Earth orbit communications and how do we improve those, and some of the things we're doing around that aspect. So it's just, as I think about my career, going back to that we were microwaving communications via fax machines to transitioning on to PCs and everything else that came in between there, to now having conversation around low Earth orbit communications and how do we improve upon that and the things associated with that. So it's just kind of, it's a vicious circle, if you will. So it's an interesting life. I would say technology is continuing to evolve. And when I look at what's happening now, because I'm looking at tech trends and what's going to be happening, because the things that we're looking at will not be realized from a commercial perspective for another 5 to 7 years. So I'm looking at things that are going, that in this case, some of you who are millennials, your kids will be playing with. And it's just really interesting to watch that, because I have seen the evolution and the things we're using today. And I know when some of those conversations first began. So I'll pause there.
It's just such a unique vantage point that you've had, and that you can so eloquently kind of summarize. It's a really cool skill that you have to take this much information and condense it down into digestible chunks. You know, for the group here, what are some of the changes that you've seen overall in how we do business? I know we've heard some things about technology and old school fax machines, but you know, let's summarize it down a little bit. Jordan, what's changed from beginning to now for you?
Yeah, so I think it does go back a little bit to that top-down structure too. You know, if I'm envisioning the workforce as a table, you know, I feel like we're inviting more chairs to the table. And what I mean by that is really, once again, across generations. Like you said, this is the first time that we've ever had, you know, 4 or 5 generations at the same time in a workforce. So we don't even, this is uncharted territory. We do not know this space. So what can we do? Invite the ideas to the table. We're getting these differing perspectives. We're getting folks that come, you know, from different values that they're actually sharing and implementing it in the workplace. So I think for me, that's, you know, one of the bigger things that I've noticed, at least over time, is we're starting to bring more people into the fold. And I think I actually saw someone, you know, in the chat talk about diversity. That's another piece of it, right? Like we're, once again, now we're a more diverse workforce, just not racially and ethnically, but also thought-wise, you know, in terms of ideation and how are we, once again, sharing perspective for the betterment and the growth of the organizations that we're part of. You know, never did I think I would be in a director level role at age 27, right? And I think it's just a testament, you know, to, once again, how we're valuing people and valuing differing perspectives, and wanting to elevate some of these folks into this space so that we can all get to the table together and have solutions.
Thanks so much, Jordan. Barbara, I can't wait to hear your perspective. Outside of fax machines, what are some of your big changes that you've witnessed?
Well, you know, I work in a pretty traditional industry, so I have seen, and that includes the political industry and government as well, similar to Malcolm. And I think the level of formality over time has become less and less. And I think that is actually in kind of artificial barriers or perceived artificial barriers. And so I think the diversity piece and all intersectionality has absolutely increased at that workforce table. That's been a dramatic difference. But I also think there's more of an emphasis on inclusion. So it's not just being at the table, but it's, are you really maximizing the inputs and giving everyone the opportunity to be part of, you know, opportunity loops? Are you being, you know, we're much more aware of our unconscious bias. Like, do you always go to the same people to try things? Or are you trying to get different views and different people to volunteer and lead projects? I think, to me, the fact that that has become business as usual, and so, you know, first it was rare, right? Then it became sort of table stakes, like you ought to do that. And then it became a competitive advantage if you were smart about bringing diverse perspectives of all types together. And now it's business as usual. Now, we still have much work to do in our journey, and we have to continue to be vigilant to make sure. But it is the way that has evolved, I think, is a wonderful It's good timing with all 5 generations here working together. But I think it also puts a big responsibility on us to make sure that we remain relentless in keeping unique perspectives. And I think every generation has a responsibility to try to kind of see where everyone else is in the continuum and bring out the best in those people. And that's where I think the benefit of the formality comes for me, because it's about the same types of communication and consideration that you give, in your day-to-day life. So it's allowing people an opportunity in an environment where they feel comfortable and can come forward and bring their best self to work every day. And when you help and create that environment, it automatically helps whatever you're working on together. And the fact that that is our language and how we think about things now is such a change from when I started. I mean, I definitely started with you might not be allowed to be in the room, or you're in a back chair. And now it's like, well, why do we have any back chairs? Why aren't we all at the table? That's a huge change.
That's a really powerful observation. I'm going to move into kind of asking kind of a second piece to that. You've kind of opened the door for us. In your guys' opinion, how can multi-generational teams get beyond some of those old practices, the ageist stereotypes and generational power struggles? How do we get to that place? Malcolm, I can't wait to hear your thoughts.
I was actually still digesting what Barbara was saying, and I just want to go back and echo what she said. I think it's really important to change where we once were. And the world has changed quite a bit. Workforce has changed tremendously since I've been in it. Your question around how do we move forward? I would say that for me, it's all around having an open mind, and an open mind to different perspectives. I would also say that I love to use the word curiosity. I'm very curious. I'm curious. I want to learn or better understand things. So I've always had this curiosity, and it's been something that has helped me to one seek to understand different perspectives, but two, to try and put myself in that individual's shoes. One of the things I've always said to people is you've got to put yourself or see things through the eyes of that individual, and being open, being curious, and trying to put yourself in those shoes can kind of help you in understanding what they're going through. Now, as I think about the how we can change, we've got to just kind of put away some of these stereotypes and begin to understand just because someone dresses a certain way, just because someone looks a certain way, you got to kind of see past all that and see who they are as an individual and as a person. And having that openness, that curiosity, the desire to want to make change. I mean, Barbara's comment about being in the back row. Well, I mean, I wasn't even in the room. So, I mean, I was just trying to get into the room. So I was working my way up to get in the room, get in the back row, then work my way to the table. And you really can't bring about change unless you're in the room, unless you're in a part of it. So those who believe that they don't want to be a part of an organization that may not align with their expectations, they'll never bring change to that organization. So you got to get in there. You got to be vigilant. You got to have a position, a perspective. I lean very hard on that today. I talked about having curiosity. I got to tell you guys, there's so many phrases and terms that I don't know, and I have to ask questions about it. And the younger generation, they somewhat laugh at me when I ask some of the questions. Some things that you may think I know, I have no clue what you're saying. I've heard some people say things, it's like a different language to me, but I will ask the question. And I may never use that language, but at least I understand it and I appreciate it. And I hope that folks are on the phone, people around the world, that they have that same kind of mindset and are open and curious and appreciative of different people's backgrounds and perspectives.
Thank you so much. Sola, I'm gonna let you take a stab at that. How do we break down some of those
Ooh.
maybe traditional or ageist kind of practices and stereotypes?
I'm it's a hard act to follow, and I'm talking about all three of you right now. You set the stage for a really good conversation, so thank you for that. I'm gonna start with Malcolm, your comments, and then work my way back. I would just add one more word to the ones you talked about and say kindness goes a long way. I think especially during COVID, it's been really hard to sometimes just be kind to one another, especially being on Zoom and being so detached in many ways and not being able to really learn much about each other outside of just day-to-day work and just doing tasks and focusing on that, but just being kind to each other and knowing that the intention when we're talking about different words and different experiences is never, shouldn't say never, but it's most likely not filled with malice or anything. So just making sure that we're all just being kind to one another, I think goes a long way as well. And then moving backwards a little bit, I think really working on that connection and connecting to people is really important. I think we've really forgotten how to be good to people and really creating those relationships, and that goes a long way. I'll give you all a personal example. So when Amy and I worked together at United Way, obviously this was pre-COVID, we were together in person, but we both found out that we have the same fondness of a certain type of dish brand. So completely random, nothing, that has to do with our day-to-day lives, but it's something that to this day we communicate about, text, and talk to each other about. So just creating that kind of a bond, I think, goes a long way in figuring out how to navigate the work side of things and being able to communicate in a way where even when there's struggles, there's not any animosity between people, and really coming to the table with those preconceived notions of like, oh, we're different generations, so we can't agree or put aside our differences, or even come to the table with different skills and not being able to see how those different skills can work together instead of against each other. The last piece of things that I think definitely to touch on is, I'm going to use the JEDI acronym here, so adding justice and equity to it as well. We really need to talk about, all of that as a whole, and I love that our community in the world over the past few years has been honing into this space. I think, Barbara, to your point, if you look at this panel itself, you have, even if you can't see them, a group of 5 minorities, 5 people that are part of minority groups. So just having this panel and having this discussion between the 5 of us, I think, is really empowering, and speaks to what you're saying in terms of bringing and creating those seats at tables. When it comes to age specifically, I think we need to remember how, again, even people in the same generation, I keep going back to that, might not really identify with each other. And then kind of seeing that as a level playing field of, listen, like, we're all people. We're all just trying to do our best and really just get our jobs done, have a good life, and help our communities do better. So how do we achieve that as a whole other than, separately? I think a lot of people really forget about that at the end of the day. So I keep going back to just being good people. And I know that's might be simple and naive to say, but I really truly believe that.
Sometimes simple is best.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to cheat our audience out of the opportunity to ask some questions. And so I definitely want to get at least one of their questions worked in to this conversation. And so I think the one that we got is best to start with, and that is, how has increased diversity impacted your work experience? Over the past 5 to 10 years, there have been, a lot more formations and a lot more awareness and intentionality around diversity. How has that affected your career path? Thoughts, Jordan?
Yeah, I think it really does go back, what I'm hearing in this conversation that we're having, the differing perspectives, but also this shift away as well from, maybe not viewing people generationally and recognizing, in terms of, the JEDI acronym, generations of people, they share similar experiences because it was a product of growing up through like the same time period. But, it's unfair to make any sort of assumptions that, it includes similar or shared values. Because that can very much differ based off their upbringing. It differs based on, your background, your family. So I think for me, that's what we're starting to see is folks are coming into the workforce with, once again, not only the diverse thought and these different ideas that they can contribute, but they're bringing their whole selves and hopefully their authentic selves to the workplace, which is something that I feel like, at least from my experience, once again, I've been in the workforce for maybe 10, 11 years. But I feel like in the beginning, that wasn't always the case. It wasn't always welcomed where you came to work with authentically, who is Jordan Gomes? How am I going to present in this room? There used to always be that anxiety around how I'm presenting or how I'm coming off to certain people. But I think we're getting towards a point where, my ideas are valued and we're recognizing that these generations of people can work in harmony if, these inaccurate perceptions are kind of corrected. And a lot of that comes, trickle down leadership. It's what's the mentality, what's the mindset of your leader, of your managers? How do they view, JEDI, diversity, inclusion, and equity in the workplace? So I think that's what I started to see just develop over the past few years.
If I can jump in just straight off, Amy, I think obviously diversity, love it. Give me more. I think we still have room to make for a lot of other people, especially when it comes to displaced workers now with the pandemic. If we're talking about people that are coming from low income backgrounds and have lived in cycles of poverty, and how we uplift them and how they have rooms on the table. So I think that's an aspect that we really need to focus on and help our community with. But on the flip side, I'm digesting what you're saying, Jordan. I'm thinking of it a little bit from a different perspective of how are we not only necessarily including these people at the table or having people at the table that look and are different to us, but when it comes to the generational piece, how do we also identify that everybody is at the table? How do we actually make sure that they're there? I don't think a lot of times we make note of that, and I think it would be smart for us to do that a lot of times. And then the last thing I'm going to say with that is that to your point of being younger and not always feeling heard at the beginning of your career, I came in really naive. I came in very strong and didn't really care. I really was like, okay, these are my opinions. This is what I think. And I quickly learned that a lot of times, you're going to find out a lot of things, but I've kind of kept that same mentality, even though a little soft-spoken at times, of still stating what I think is, an idea or a way to do things, even if that might not be the best way to do it. So I think just allowing people to have that space is also important, where they can vocalize their opinions, voice their opinions and ideas without feeling judged is very, very important.
Thank you so much. We've had another question come in, and I'm going to start with Malcolm. How do you approach work-life balance?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Work-life balance is very important to me, and I see it from two different angles. It's my work-life balance, and in addition to those people who work for me or I work with, and I think that it's important that you lead by example. So in my world, I haven't been in the I think I've been in the office, physically in an office, maybe 5 times in 2 years. So I've been working remote for 2 years, and even before that, I had I knew that my career I've led some very large teams. I've been in some pretty big roles, and I know that people follow the leader. So if the leader is somebody who is sending emails at a certain time or responding to emails at a certain time, people feel this pressure or this obligation to do such things. So I've going back probably 15 years or more, I've had this approach where I don't communicate after a certain hour, unless it's an emergency. And I take vacations. Oh, do I take vacations? And when I take vacations, you don't hear from me. I just totally disappear. And you may even forget what I look like, depending upon how long I'm gone. So going back to my statement around leading by example, I tell people I work hard, but I play hard as well. And I'm going to enjoy my life. And I encourage people to do that. And I call them out if I see that they're not doing it. So my view of it is be a leader and lead and be that example of and live that kind of life that you expect or want your team to follow. So that means there's times I may even check out during the day because I've got something I've got to do. And I tell people I've got something to do. And I don't ask people what they're doing. I really manage to results. And I think that's really how they get it done. Granted, I'm concerned how they get it done, but it's really more around, did they get it done in the anticipated time that that was expected and agreed upon? And my view of it is, as long as they do that and they're getting their job done, I expect that they're managing their personal life in a certain way, because there's a gray line there that you can't step over as a leader, because you can't get into people's personal lives. You can just set the bar, you can lead by example, and at that point, you kind of have to let people be who they are. And you have to keep in mind, some people just are workaholics. They just are. And if they are, you have to give them room and let them do what they want to do and how they want to do it. So that's how I manage work-life balance.
Thank you so much. I am on board with your plan. Barbara, a lady that can be at so many different events and representing Huntington in so many different ways. How do you handle work-life balance?
Well, I think Malcolm and I went to the same work-life balance school of work hard, play hard. But I think it goes back to, like, I heard Malcolm saying he makes a commitment to himself. He schedules his vacations. That's really important time to him. And he has time boundaries and he has times when he checks out. So I think whatever your personal situation is, and, there were times in my life where I was working 2 jobs and going to school, or I didn't have the kind of flexibility I might have as a more senior professional now. You have to work within your environment and what you need to do to survive in your job and those sorts of things. But you can make commitments to yourself about what's important to you. And I think you have to stick by those commitments and then find whatever flexibility you can to achieve those commitments within your personal situation. So for me, I have a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I worked really hard to have those kids, and they are my top priority. And I will move heaven and earth to make sure that my trick is I'm a planner. So, I will in August, when the school schedules start coming out and we know when all the events are and the parent teacher conferences and the meetings, I sort of put those things on my calendar of like, this is sticking. And then I plan everything else around it. I put the vacations on the calendar. And there are times when work has to give, and there are times when family has to give. I think, to me, balance is not a day-to-day equation. It's an on-balance equation. So as an example, I was in DC the last 3 days. So I was away from my family for 3 days. So I'm going to really make sure that, I was there this morning to get my son off the bus, and I'll make sure that we have a family dinner tonight. And it's making sure that, even though I didn't see him for 3 days, he's going to make sure that he'll know that I'm here, and I'll get caught up in the next couple of days. So it's to me, it's very much a in the trenches kind of day-to-day prioritization and decisioning, not unlike waitressing or some of my other life skills back at the beginning of my career. You have to constantly prioritize and reprioritize, but you figure out what is really important to you, and those are the things that you don't budge on.
Wise words for us all, that's for certain. Well, we've got less than 5 minutes to go here. We want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I was hoping that each of our 4 panelists could just give us a minute or so of, what is anything else that the audience should know about your opinion and your perspective on this topic. Solo, we can start with you.
Sure. Thank you, Amy, and thank you all for tuning in today. But really quickly to your point, I actually, and this, I'm going to leave this on a cliffhanger. I actually feel that since I'm still, kind of in this earlier stage of my career, that those pressures are really high. And I don't know if you experienced that when you were first entered the workforce of, being present and putting work first, and, really pushing and especially building a career and wanting to make that happen. And that might be a personal thing and motivation of mine. But I hope it gets easier to balance things moving on. But I think as a generation, we have a lot on our plate and a lot to do to make sure the world is in a good place for the next few generations. So I would just say just kindness and taking each person as an individual and understanding their backgrounds and circumstances is really important. And not just seeing the number behind somebody or the assumption of what the number might be, because those notions probably going to come and bite us later on. So I think that's all for me, Amy.
Thank you, Solo. Jordan, a close.
Yeah, so when I think of, what everyone's shared today, really, when I think about being solution oriented, how do we meet this moment? I just think about, how are organizations, how are employers, taking the time to understand people, once again, as Solo and everyone else has shared, from that human approach. We know that there's varying communication styles across generations. We know that folks have different career motivators. So making sure that we're really, once again, meeting each individual need rather than trying to view it collectively as the generation. And I guess really the final thing is, how can we recognize this moment in time as really a catalyst for some innovation? To Malcolm's point earlier, let's lead with some humility. Let's lead with curiosity. When it comes to areas or subjects or content that we're not very familiar about, take the time to lean on each other for that knowledge and those insights. Because I think that's the only way that we're going to improve, and really help out our organizations and by product help our communities. So really thankful for this conversation, by the way.
Great thoughts. Barbara?
Yeah, my speed round tip would be to remember that wisdom is not necessarily associated with age. It's associated with your unique life experience. And by being conscious of that and pulling out the life experience of those around you, to Malcolm's point, making sure everybody's at the table, and to Solo's point, making sure that we show each other grace, because I'm sure I say very dated things all the time. But we can pull out and benefit from that wisdom. And I think that is the secret sauce that gets us to that innovation and that moving forward as a world together that Jordan's talking about. It's really an exciting time.
Thank you. Malcolm, we all have our pencils and our pens ready. Bring us home.
I don't know if I have anything. Solo, I got to tell you, I really appreciate your words around kindness. I thank you for that. I do believe in that. And I apologize for leaving that out because that's so important. Barbara, your experience and all that you brought, I think is, I love your stories. They're just great stories around customer service and your passion. Jordan, your stories, I love how you articulate yourself. I came to this meeting, this panel, and I said I was excited to learn from others, and all of you didn't fall short. I learned so much from each and every one of you. I actually am not sure if I have much to add to what the others have said, but what I will do is say that I'm excited about the future. I'm excited about the future from the perspective of for me, my work career is much shorter in front of me than what I have behind me. So when I look at the folks here at the table, it excites me to know that I'm handing it off to a really good group of folks who have kindness, curiosity, who have passion, who have interests, who have ideas that really can help set the course as we go forward, to bring all the right people to the table, to make sure that they're heard, that they're appreciated, and that that we have a world from a professional as well as from a personal perspective that's just well positioned for success as we go forward. So thank you for all of you. I've learned so much from you. Again, I couldn't add much more to what my other panelists have said here today. So I would just end with that.
Well, thank you all so very much for spending an hour with us today. As a trusted partner in Central Ohio for nearly 100 years, United Way is committed to working side by side with our community and for our community towards a better tomorrow, which I think you all very succinctly and eloquently got across today. United Way brings together donors, volunteers, advocates, nonprofits, leaders, and more to take on Central Ohio's toughest challenges. We hope that you continue to join us for future conversations like this one. And the information around those can be found at liveunitedcentralohio.org/events. And our next one is March 22nd, because our community is stronger when we all show up united. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Amy.
Have a great day. Thank you, Amy.